My name is Paul Lipton. I am chairperson of the Florida Bar Historic Video Series. Today we're interviewing the Honorable Federal Judge Pat Seitz. Good morning, Judge Seitz.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for joining us here today and being able to share some time with us. I have a bunch of questions I'm going to be asking you that deal with not only you and your professional career, but also your thoughts about the legal profession today. So with that, why don't we get into it?
Be my guest.
Thank you. Can you give us a brief history of your education, starting with why you went to law school and then thereafter?
The why I went to law school is an afterthought. I grew up in the generation where women went to college and you worked a couple of years and then you raised a family. While I was in college, only one time while walking through the poli-sci building ever thought of law school when I saw a poster saying those that are preparing for the law school entrance exam do such and such. That was the only thing, because my major was fine arts and history. But working, I had the opportunity to be a management intern with the U.S. Department of Labor. That was sort of the fair-haired child. And I fell into that after a couple of other experiences, and I was working in the pilot project in 1969 for the first summer employment of disadvantaged youth. And I was working out in Washington, D.C. at Dunbar High School, that had been the premier high school in Washington, D.C. back during segregation. And I was the only white in the group. And I had a mentor there by the name of Bill Butler. He was the head, and he was a very savvy human being that all of the kids could relate to. And I think that experience was a turning point as I realized what we could do to help make a difference in other people's lives. I had taken the law school entrance exam that fall because I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And that summer, after I found out I had been accepted both by Georgetown and the University of Miami, the two law schools that I applied to, I thought, at the end of 3 years, what I'm doing now, the entrepreneurial nature, will be gone because it will become a bureaucracy. If I go to law school, at the end of 3 years, I will have the tools to continue doing what I'm doing here. And that's that, and the guy that I had been engaged to, and I broke the engagement, and he said, well, if you're not going to get married, then go do something. He gave me the impetus, and I went to law school. But I have to tell you that my father and mother were living in Brazil at the time. My father came back, and as sort of the vanguard, we went to dinner, and I broke it to him that I was quitting my job and I was going to law school. And he said, that's a stupid idea. His next question was, who's going to pay for this? And I told him that I was going to pay for it. And that was one of the best gifts of the many gifts that my parents gave me, because putting myself through law school made me realize that I could do it. And I'm forever grateful.
And you went to which law school?
I went to Georgetown.
How'd you find law school at Georgetown, living in that environment?
The first, I started in 1970. It was at the height of the Vietnam War protests. It was also the time that the law schools, I did not realize this until many years later, had made a decision that they were going to increase enrollment of women and minorities. And so That year, we had the grand total of 70 women in our class out of 650. And we were in the old building that has since been torn down. It became a parking lot and now is some new government building, what they call the Red Brick Building at Georgetown. It had one woman's bathroom, and that was down in the basement. And it was an experience. I can remember our property professor, Bill Stanmeyer, God bless him. He wanted to be very solicitous of all of the women. And so he had all of us over into his office. And the collection of women are there, and he says, if you all ever need anything, please do not hesitate to ask me. And I don't remember, Lois Frankel was in my law school class. I don't remember if it was her or Liz Shriver, who, you know, we're all sort of looking at each other like, what do you say to this poor man? She said, thank you very much, Professor, but I don't think any of us would be here if we didn't think we could handle it. And with that, we all walked out.
That's wonderful.
But I had some terrific fellow classmates. I think that my love of Georgetown has grown since I have been farther away from law school. In some ways, I'm very envious of those that went to smaller law schools where there was a real sense of community among the fellow students. Georgetown had many other attributes. I mean, it was in Washington, D.C. Since I was working my way through law school, covering the Supreme Court for the Dallas Times-Herald, it was right next to the Supreme Court building, so I could just ride my bicycle up to the court. And the people that I had to, I mean, the opportunities that I had there, I may not have had if I'd gone to a smaller school. But
Sure. Well, that leads me then to this question, because I was going to ask you about your professional career, but mentioning the reporter for the Dallas paper is so fascinating. What was your various occupations during, after college, through law school, and then after law school? And I'll just sit back and we'll all listen.
Coming out of college with a history degree with an emphasis in Russian studies and not being a native speaker, and a fine arts studio minor, let's say that where my interests were, the providers of jobs were not knocking down my door. I ended up working for the Department of Labor. I worked in, the first job I had was working as a legislative liaison between the Department of Labor, U.S. Training and Employment Services, and the House Committee on Education. Shortly after I started working there, well, I have to back up. I almost forgot the first job after college. I worked, ready for this one,
I'm ready,
as an editorial assistant for the American Society of Landscape Architects. I walked into the office and they were asking for, like I said, an editorial assistant. The person who had the typewriter in the desk, and it was, you know, electric typewriter, something I was not familiar with, was typing 103 words a minute. Little did I realize that I was to replace her. Probably if I could have done the job that my boss did and he could have done the secretarial work, it would have been a happy relationship. But since I could only type 32 words a minute, my career at the American Society of Landscape Architects was not long-lived. And I'm very grateful for that, because it then got me over into much more of a service provider. Once President Nixon came into office, we were reorganized, and I was moved over to the Minority Outreach Program, where I had an opportunity to work with some individuals that had worked on the state level in helping match minorities with jobs. And it gave me the first opportunity to travel outside of Washington and look at program jobs. But again, it was one of those real experiences that you had, or insights that you have. Here I was already, geared up to go, and I was wondering why others around me didn't have this same enthusiasm. I now an older person, and I enjoy the enthusiasm of the young people coming in, and realize how older people need to tap that energy. And the young people need to realize that as you get older, you may move more slowly, but you have wisdom, so you know how to use your strength more effectively. So there was not only substantive learning, but also hopefully lifetime learning. But it was in the fall that I then realized that, riding on the bus one day and just looking and saying, okay, where am I going with my life? How am I using the talents that God gave me to serve others? And that's one October, I took the Foreign Service entrance exam. The next Saturday, the law school entrance exam, and then the management intern exam. And the management intern exam happened, the results of that happened much more quickly. And I chose to stay with the Department of Labor and then go into this special project, which I'm forever grateful for the opportunity, and put the other two opportunities on hold. Well, the State Department wasn't hiring at that time in any event. And that's how I got to law school.
Wonderful. Can you give us an idea of your professional career prior to the bench?
I'm one of those people that have not had a widely diverse career in as far as my profession. I clerked for Judge Ritchie, who was the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, who is truly my father in the law. And I had the joy of clerking for him in his third year on the bench. And my only regret is that he is now not here physically, because he was just truly my first mentor in our profession. He left me his robe when he died, and I wore that robe when I was sworn in, and I wore that all my first year until I had it replicated, so I don't wear that out. But I feel his presence every day. And he is the one. I'm very blessed that I was in Washington right before he died, because I visited him while I was working up there with the Office of the National Drug Control Policy, and he kept saying, you take off the mask from the oxygen, and he would say, "Now, Patty," that's what he always called me, "you've got to get going on this." And so I did promise him that I would apply for the bench. And very fortuitously, shortly after he died, Judge Rutger very surprisingly announced that he was going to take senior status, so I put my name in. But in between that, the only two other jobs that I had was always with Steele, Hector, and Davis. I started out as their first woman lawyer and became a partner there. And then in '96, I had one of those calls literally from the blue from Barry McCaffrey, whom I had met, saying, I'll never forget this phone call. Pat, just take a leave of absence and for a year, just a year, come up and help me jumpstart this office. And I remember saying, Barry, to work for you? What a hoot. The man is truly one of the most dynamic leaders.
I remember reading about this. I remember that part of your life.
I said, I need to make 2 phone calls. I'd like to talk to my husband about this, since it will impact him, and then I'd like to talk to one of my former law partners to see if she thinks that I could do it. And he said, well, who would that be? And I said, Janet Reno. He said, oh yeah, I'll talk to her. She'll be very enthusiastic. And when I called Janet, she said, how do you know Barry McCaffrey? First her question was, what does Alan think of this? Right. And her second question was, how do you know Barry McCaffrey? And I told her the story, and she said, do it.
And explain that to our viewers, exactly what what it was that you were doing in Washington for that period of time?
I was the drug czar, Barry McCaffrey, General Barry McCaffrey's chief counsel, and literally helped him, was part of his team to jumpstart that office. It's difficult to describe what we did in one sentence until I saw the movie Traffic, which is up for Oscar nominations. And I sat there with Alan, my husband, and kept, doing this. I was saying, that really happened. And I remember many times the president saying, or the chief of staff saying, the president has penciled you in for FaceTime. And then coming back and saying the president can't meet with you for FaceTime. Or the situation where we briefed the equivalent of the drug czar in Mexico, who was then arrested 18 days later. Just dealing with the issue of having a balanced, comprehensive approach to the drug policy in the United States. And thanks to the opportunity to work with Barry McCaffrey and his vision and his long-term commitment, I think is reflected in that movie Traffic, and how it needs to be, you need to approach both the demand and the supply. And we have not given as equal emphasis to the demand reduction. When we have, it has made remarkable differences. And the little bit that we have done in that area has caused drug usage in the United States to fall from the highs of 25 million regular users in 1979 to 12 million, at least when I was in the office in 1996 to 1997. So it does make a difference. But the concern that we have is that the emphasis, the heavy emphasis on law enforcement is not what is going to achieve the results that we really want to. And it was police officers that were the most effective advocates of the need for treatment, prevention, and education. Because otherwise, they said, you get into a revolving door. And as Barry McCaffrey would say, we cannot arrest our way out of this issue. And it's not a war on drugs. We need to have the same approach that we have to treating cancer. It's a daily commitment to healthy living and treating those who do have addictions.
Judge, you've been answering part of my next question along the way, because my next question is dealing with who were the mentors that helped you or guided you along the way. But before I get to that question, I obviously need to ask you about the presidency of the Florida Bar before you became a judge. Can you share with us how that came to be and your thoughts about that?
How it came to be was Patsy Fawcett, who is now also a U.S. District Judge. She had been a mentor on the senior board of governors of the Florida Bar, and really, I think, would have been the first woman president of the Florida Bar. I admire and respect her very much. She was appointed a U.S. District Court judge. She was my senior, both in the experience and the profession, as just, I just think, wise in so many ways. We were riding on a plane one day, and she turned to me and she said, well, it's payback time, Seitz. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, you have a firm that will support you. You have done everything that needs to be done to show that you can do the job. If you don't do it, no one will do it in this century. And you've got to run for it. And I said, what have I done to offend you? She said, no, it's just there are responsibilities. You have been given so many opportunities to develop, and you have to give back. I must admit that I realized that there was someone who was extremely qualified, already had his hat in the ring, and he had been working on this issue for some time. He was from the middle of the state. We had had two predecessors to me were from South Florida. There was a real question of, I had not been a president of a local bar, which had been the traditional stepping stone. And it was sort of an analysis. You are the dark horse candidate, Seitz, and do you really want to take on the costs, to say, out-of-pocket dollars, which our predecessors had been Alan Diamond and our incoming president-elect right now, and they had both spent $250,000 in their respective campaigns. And John Fisher was, fortunately, as frugal as I, but we both ended up spending close to $150,000, to say nothing of the time that it took away from the practice of law. But I will tell you that it was probably one of the best decisions, because it was, for me, truly my first commitment to risk-taking. Because I thought, and the issue that I struggled with is, suppose I fail after not bringing in any income for a year and costing the firm $150,000. I mean, you'll not be a prized partner. And I said, what I need to do is run a good campaign to the best of my ability, because there are issues that I truly believe the Florida Bar needs to address. We had some serious problems with our membership at that time and with the legislature. We were in a reactive mode. The profession was very stressed. The transformation from a profession to a business. There were many people unhappy in the practice of law. And I felt that it was an opportunity for bar leadership to provide a vision of the bar, a long-term plan for how we got to that vision, because being president of the bar is 1 year, and you cannot turn an institution in less than 3 years. And I decided I would go out and provide that vision as an alternative. And if it was not accepted, at least I got up there and gave it my best, and hopefully opened doors for future women. And that's why I ran.
That's wonderful. Let me then get back to the question that we've been answering a little bit along the way. Who do you consider the mentors that helped you or guided you along the way? You've mentioned some, but can you expand upon why they were your mentors and what mentors they may have been?
You have to start with my parents. My dad is a retired lieutenant general who instilled two things in me: integrity and a commitment to service. And there's my mother, who died over 20 years ago, and I wish she were here. Physically, she's here every day with me, spiritually. She had a joy for life and a selflessness that I actually am going to get a little teary about. Sure. But a creative, practical, can-do sense of adventure and joy for living that just made everyone love to be around her. So with those two initial role models, and then growing up as an Army brat, so you moved constantly, and you had, but I truly had a sense of roots, a sense of tradition, a sense of service to other people. Sure. And they also instilled in me something that is extremely important to me, which is my faith. As I moved into my profession, I've spoken about Judge Ritchie, just simply because he was a courageous individual who did what he thought was right and did it to the best of his ability. He was not afraid. When I was in the firm, I had some significant role models there, and I'm so grateful to the opportunity to have had my legal career at Steele, Hector, and Davis, because I came to it because it had three things. Actually, I came to Steele, Hector because of the three things, and they promised that I could try cases, and then if I didn't like it at the end of 2 years, I could go back to Washington, and I would at least have had those 2 years under my belt trying cases. But they did interesting legal work. They were truly committed to their community, to public service, and to making the place that we live better by giving back. And the last thing is, they were interesting people. They had balanced lives. They got out on the water. They got involved in politics. They got involved in the community. They read books. They had discussions about things other than just the case that I have. They were just people you wanted to be around. And that's why whenever somebody would come and say, go someplace else, or whenever, as one usually finds in the practice of law, you want to strangle all of your partners on occasion, I would say, I don't think that there's any other place that I would be any happier. These are the people. And the people that were influential in bringing me there were Sandy Dallenbert, who is now the president of FSU and was the president of the ABA, and I was his associate in my first year. There was also John Edward Smith, who convinced me. John Edward was the man that you never saw his fingerprints on anything. He was more interested in other people's success, but he was always in the background, giving suggestions and inspiration. He was truly the Lao Tzu's first category of leader. And he died on the day that I had my confirmation hearing. But he was my alter. He took the place of my father and his wife Sarah when I moved down here and was the first woman at the Steele Hector. Then there's like Dory Davis of the firm, who was the first city attorney or county attorney for the Miami-Dade County, back then Dade County. I mean, these people who had been pioneers, but who cared about the profession, who cared about their community, who believed that we are as successful as we care about others. They were the people in the firm that really were incredible mentors. And then you have somebody like Louis Hector, and you see the variety of things that he's done. And Sandy had once told me, he said, always be open to any opportunity. Do not be afraid to at least listen. And as I went on in my profession, and I had Janet, when Janet was the second woman that the firm hired, and to have her as the first woman partner in the firm, I mean, what a mentor. The other woman who was a significant mentor in my life, John Edward Smith introduced me to, was Elizabeth Dufresne, a remarkable, vivacious individual. And the other person who is truly a mentor, and particularly in my later career, as I got close to deciding to run for the president of the Florida Bar, and subsequent to that, has been Chesterfield Smith. there's a man whose philosophy is help others.
Yes.
You succeed when others succeed. And since I've seen the world through his articulate vision, what a difference that has made for me. But he has opened and more doors for women and minorities. He has inspired more people to go beyond themselves. And as I look at all of my mentors, they have all had that characteristic. They wanted others to use their talents to make this a better world.
Wonderful. I'd like to shift gears a little bit now and discuss with you some of your thoughts about the legal profession itself. So with that, let me ask you first, what changes have you seen in the legal profession over the last few years?
The most significant change, there are three. The most significant one is the transformation from a service profession to a business. The second is the sheer explosion in size. And the third is the actual improvement in the quality of legal services rendered through specialization. If there's a fourth, it has been the adaptation to using technology as a assistant as opposed to being driven by technology and controlled by technology. I think the profession in that sense is going through the same transformation that the rest of society is going through. Technology has, in many ways, made things easier, but they have also produced greater demands and moved us at a faster pace. And I think that that has caused greater stress, has caused, and stress leads to a greater sense of competition, anxiety, cutting corners. It tends to shut out the quiet that you need to be at peace with yourself and to let wisdom grow. And I think that to me is the most important thing that lawyers provide. We should provide wisdom in helping our clients resolve and avoid conflict. That, to me, is what a lawyer gives to his client or her client. And I'm concerned that in the competition that has increased with the increased number of lawyers and the move towards the business profession, we have a tendency to become a hired gun, and to simply be the vehicle through which those that have the financial resources to afford us can carry out their own baser emotional drives.
I understand what you're saying. So that then takes me to the next logical question, which is, have you seen the legal profession get better or worse over the years? And I think you've answered part of that, but I'd like you to reflect on that a little bit for us.
In some ways it's better, and in some ways it has to be more vigilant to guard against the worst aspects. On the better side, there is a commitment, I believe, to professionalism, and there is a commitment through continuing legal education to being the best that you can be as far as knowledge of the law. And I think that that is very important. On the other side, though, I am concerned that with the competition, the fact that because we're now so large and we're moving so quickly, we don't have the old mentoring system that I benefited from, and the opportunity to have little cases and to learn on the little cases. The jockeying, now that it's no longer a seller's market, it's a buyer's market. The transformation, so that the primary thing that a firm needs to look at is, can I pay the rent? Can I pay those that work for me? Can I pay myself? And the rise of the professionalism, I mean, the David Brills, I mean, not the David Brills, the Stephen Brills, the American Lawyer, where suddenly you're reading about, well, so-and-so was, what was that famous, the first big large law firm that imploded? I can't remember.
Yeah, Finley Cumble.
Finley Cumble. And I remember people would say, well, how can they make all that money? I'm therefore an inferior because I'm not making that kind of money. And we got into that same trap of measuring our worth by the car that we drive, the house that we live in, what we say we earn, by the size of the cases that we handle, as opposed to, how did you make the world better for your fellow human being? That's one of the things I like about this job. Although the caseloads are phenomenal, and the desire to do the best you can and to do justice, but at the same time, I don't have to be worried about timesheets. I don't have to be worried about the billable hour. I have to be worried about making good decisions quickly, but I have the opportunity to hopefully do what's right. And I can't tell you, that really takes me back to the experience that I had as a young lawyer. And my firm was very committed to doing what's right. And they did that. I can remember times when they told a client, well, either she's the lawyer or there will be no lawyer. And, that was somewhat of a bold step back in those days, in the early 70s.
Sure.
I don't know that I've answered your question.
No, you have, and I appreciate that. So what I'd like to ask you, then I think, again, you've given us some glimpses into this area. What recommendations could you give to judges, lawyers, law school, deans, as to how to improve the profession or legal training, how to just make it better on different levels?
Wow, that's the $64,000 question that we all debate.
It's a small question, and it's just a yes or no, Judge.
Well, for judges, and I am privileged to be on a professionalism, the ABA's Center for Professionalism program this June. I think that we need to set a standard. We need to provide the vision for how we want lawyers to perform in our presence, and pat them on the back when they do that. That's the carrot. There also needs to be the stick, and not to be shy about calling a spade, sending the lawyer to the bar, or imposing discipline and sanctions when they fall below the ethical standards. And it's the same balanced approach. For lawyers, it is letting the motto, let your word be your bond, be your hallmark. if your word is your bond, and you give your word and treat others with respect, and you emphasize that and make that your mantra on a daily basis, and examine your conscience at the end of each day and said, have I lived up to the way that I want to see myself? That's how we start with each one of us on a daily basis. And then for those that are our partners, for those that are the lawyers that we're training, we need to, in a very loving, constructive way, not in a destructive way, in a constructive way, because I do believe most people would prefer to see themselves as good, as making a positive difference. Support that, reinforce that. When they do slide, you need to take them aside and say, this is not you. You expect better of yourself. Let me help you be the best that you can be. And for the law schools, I would like to see the law schools do two things. One, because I believe that they do an excellent job in conveying knowledge. They have wonderful lawyers on the faculty. I would like them to help lawyers understand that what we deal with, or for our future lawyers, we deal with human beings. Yeah. And that most conflicts, which is why people go to lawyers, arise because of emotions that get between people and interfere with their ability to rationally see a situation and decide what is in the best interest for both sides. It's sort of like looking at the orange and deciding what each person needs out of the orange and how can we make this a win-win. Because too often, those that are drawn to law school are very good verbally, like to argue. But you need to go beyond just those verbal talents and translate those talents into something productive, which is problem solving in a very constructive manner that understands that you don't just zealously represent your client, you are also an officer of the court. And in being an officer of the court, you have a responsibility to the greater whole. And it's always in your client's best interest to think of themselves as part of the whole. Because although right now may be this one interest where they want to have their own interests prevail, some other time someone else may be in that position, and you would want that person who was in the position, and you're simply in the greater whole, to think of how it affects you. And I guess if we could convey that to help future lawyers understand, how do you deal with difficult people? How do you deal with people that are in crisis? How do you deal with people that refuse to see reality? I mean, because a lot of times we have to share bad news. How do you also train lawyers to deal with the many ethical problems that they're going to be faced when their job is on the line? How do you give them the resources and the knowledge of, when you're in this situation, here are people that you can call so that you don't feel alone. So that you, because your instincts come up and they say, the red flags, you don't feel comfortable. It's inconsistent with what you've been taught. But then what do you do when you're in that situation? Where do you go for help? And that's what I do think that law schools if they would provide a help desk back at their law schools, what a great alumni resource that would be. You know, even when you're gone, we have an ethical help desk back here where you can call and not be embarrassed. Call us if you need a mentor, and we will match you up. My real ideal for the profession and for law schools would be to have the equivalent of a nonprofit legal services center where graduates who actually want to go into the practice of law would then spend the next year, where you would have an office, you would see clients who would come in for reduced legal services. I mean, it would sort of be like a legal services clinic where you could learn how to run an office, where you could learn how to efficiently handle clients, where you could learn how to draft under the supervision of some lawyers emeritus who would provide the mentoring. You know, we have a number of lawyers I'm thinking of Dick Massington, who is a wonderful human being and a great mentor to people. He retired from the profession, but wouldn't it be wonderful to have someone like a Dick Massington mentoring about 25 legal services providers? You know, and you would pay for the office, you as the student would pay for the office space. It would add a year to the law school experience, but you would come out of that with a greater sense of self-confidence. You would come out of that with better skills to provide the public. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. How would you define professionalism?
Professionalism is a way of providing service to others of a legal nature. It is a hallmark. A lawyer who exemplifies professionalism has several hallmarks. They are a person of character. By that, and by the character, I mean that is a person who is trustworthy, is respectful of others, who has an innate sense of responsibility, who is caring, who has an innate sense of fairness. I mean, it's very difficult to define what is fair, but we all know when something is unfair.
Sure. And
who is unabashedly willing to pick up and exercise their civic responsibility to the greater whole. I mean, that is the person as an individual. And that person carries out in providing the highest quality of legal services that individual is capable of providing to resolve and avoid conflicts on behalf of their client.
I really have two more questions for you that are questions that are not necessarily legal in nature, but tell us a little bit more about you, and that's this. First, what are your core beliefs? When you're going through the rough times, what do you latch onto as a core belief so that we can understand better what's open for us, what's available to us?
My core belief is that I am a child of God. God does not make junk, and that I was given certain talents and gifts And my responsibility is to use those talents and gifts to the best of my ability to serve others. And at the end of my life, I will have to render an accounting. And that if I just put one foot in front of the other and do to the best of my ability in a loving manner to serve others, God takes care of the rest. That's probably my core belief.
Thank you. Final question. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it and create something new or better in the legal profession, if you had a magic wand to help young lawyers, let's say, how would you use it? What would you do?
I would create this legal clinic sort of adjunct to law schools to give those who want to provide legal services an opportunity to learn how to really do it. Even if they wanted to go to a big firm, I think that if you understand better how it's actually provided, you will be more effective and have greater self-confidence if you went to a large firm. I would also probably, before people go to law school, require them to spend at least 5 months waiting tables. Because I think that that helps you decide, can you really continue to smile when people are making great demands on you and they're hungry? And to see if, because I think, maybe not so much now, but I remember in the 80s there were a lot of people that were going into the profession because they wanted to make a lot of money. They didn't want to dig ditches. They weren't good at numbers, and they fainted at the sight of blood. And so what else was there left but, quote, law school? And a lot of people got there and then decided, you know, that's not all there is. So I guess I don't know that there's any one thing as a magic wand that I would give to anyone, to young lawyers starting out, except maybe there is a magic wand so each of them could have, before they start law school, insight into where they're going to be 30 years from then. And, you know, make them sit down and think, okay, here I am in the year 2001. 30 years from now is the year of 2031. What is the world going to look like? Let me look at other people that are now 30 years older than I am. Let me study them. Let me talk to them and see how their lives have changed and what did they do. How did they look at the world 30 years ago compared to now looking back? And spend some time just going through that thought process to see, is law school really what I want for me long term, or is it simply what I'm going to do because it's a good education? And you can never go wrong with a law school education. I think that's what I would wish for every person who is going to law school, so that they had a better sense before they make the investment of 3 years and incur all of those law school debts and get trapped in a set of golden handcuffs. If they really understand, is this what I want to do and how I want to use my talents to serve my fellow human beings and make this world a better place?
Judge, thank you so much for your time. I feel as if with the answers you've given and the time we've spent that you have provided a magic wand for a number of lawyers who will be watching this to give them some thought and insight as to what they would like to do and the goals they would like to have. On behalf of the Florida Bar and the Historic Video Series, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure.
Paul, thank you.